Ever since I made a video talking about Assassin's Creed in World War II and why the lore was incredibly complicated and convoluted, I've gotten a lot of comments asking, would it work in World War I? What does the lore say about World War I? And so I started looking into it. I dug through the wiki, I dug through all the little passages and notes that you can find in the world looking for it, and I found out some interesting stuff. Most interesting thing of which is simply that there's not a lot about it, which actually could be a good sign because it could mean that they're leaving it open to potentially put a game there, which would make sense. If there's a lot of lore surrounding an area, they're very constrained going into that era or area on like globally, wherever it is. So if there's nothing really mentioned about it, it means that there's a lot of freedom for them to go in there and develop a game that they want to do without having all these constraints of prior lore precedent crap. So I started looking into it, and most of this information comes from Assassin's Creed Syndicate, a great game. If you haven't played it, I highly recommend that you do. It's, of course, the most recent Assassin's Creed game, and it gives you a lot of cool, not only DLC, but you also get tons of cool branching story. It's awesome. It's awesome. And there's a sequence in Assassin's Creed Syndicate which allows you to play as a descendant of Evie Fry. And basically, you go through and you can go into World War I and meet Winston Churchill. And essentially, he asks you to do a favor for him. And if you do it, then once he gets back into Parliament, then he's going to push the issue of women's rights to try to get women the right to vote in the UK, which, okay. Now, the reason this hooks back up to the video I did on World War II in Assassin's Creed, Winston Churchill in World War I is an assassin sympathizer, but by World War II, he's been convinced otherwise, and he becomes a Templar sympathizer, which to me is a little bizarre. Winston Churchill, definitely, at least from all the historical readings I've ever done, seems like the type of person who's very opinionated and isn't prone to changing his entire worldview easily, especially because he's an older gentleman around World War II. So to just all of a sudden change your mind completely about something so drastic as the New World Order doesn't seem super believable to me. What I think happened is the writers decided on the plot idea first, and then all of a sudden they found that they were crisscrossing every which way. They decided that they wanted everyone in World War II, all the world leaders, whether it's FDR, yes, I know it's FDR. I misspoke once. People didn't watch to the end of the video. But I misspoke once and said JFK because I was talking about all these presidents. Yes, FDR. FDR. They have it be FDR, Winston Churchill. They had Joseph Stalin, Hitler, the entirety of the Japanese government. Basically, everybody involved in World War II was a Templar operative, and they were all doing it. It was a grand conspiracy. They started the war to control the populace, and this was their grand scheme, which, okay, I could see how that would work. The main point of that video was that they were grasping for straws, and with World War I, they'd have to shine a light on the fact that Winston Churchill is somehow being corrupted by that time, which seems out of character for him at the very, very least, if not completely unlikely. But nonetheless, maybe it could happen. Maybe he's a body double. I don't know. But by World War II, he sympathizes with the Templar Order. But by World War I, he's still an assassin sympathizer. So, with that said, in the lore, which is, I got all my Templar lore collected here, there's not a lot of information specifically stated about World War I. The only real mention of World War I is through little kind of hints when talking about Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison, about energy and all of that, and then also mentions of course, the sequence in Assassin's Creed Syndicate where you actually get to go and play in World War I, which I think to me is a really cool glimpse at how Assassin's Creed would work in a semi-modern era, because you are actually going into an era where everyone you're fighting has a gun, where there's snipers, where there's planes, where there's zeppelins, in a sequence in that, which the gameplay you're seeing now, there's a sequence where you're shooting down a zeppelin, which is awesome. I mean, that's awesome. And who would have guessed that that would be in an Assassin's Creed game? But at the very least, it was an attempt to see what, like, if it could work, if that sequence could work, or if it would just ruin the gameplay. And having played it, I can say safely, I think it would work. And I think, as you're seeing on the screen, I think it works. It's beautiful. It works. The gameplay is still Assassin's Creed-esque, but different enough that it works. I think it could definitely work. And the biggest constraint within the Assassin's Creed world is their lore. It's incredibly convoluted in every which way, and even parts of it have errors in it. In a note that you can find, it mentions that Thomas Edison, to get back at Nikola Tesla, about the alternating current, direct current, which is a historical thing. Nikola Tesla invented alternating current, which was much more efficient than the direct current that Thomas Edison had been pushing. And so in the Assassin's Creed lore, basically Thomas Edison went to J.P. Morgan, who was financing Nikola Tesla, and said, because J.P. Morgan and Thomas Edison had been working together previously, and they were both Templars. So Edison said, hey man, can you talk to Tesla, get him to stop? No? Okay, well, you need to just stop funding him, which in real life did happen. JP Morgan stopped funding Nikola Tesla's pursuits because it was not going to be financially beneficial, but they stopped and they went about their way. And they mentioned that there were demonstrations where they electrocuted elephants and dogs and cats and things with alternating current, killing them, which is true. They did do that. They did it in big public demonstrations, which is horrifying to think of, that they would have like kittens and then they would electrocute them to demonstrate how bad alternating current was and why you should do the Thomas Edison method, which was direct current. But they mention in that note that it was demonstrated on public television, which they're arguing about alternating and direct current. And then there's a big typo or misspeaking, or maybe they meant public demonstration instead of television. But they mentioned specifically that it was shown on television. And they're still arguing about direct or alternating current. Like, there wasn't television. There wasn't public television, certainly. So there are some flaws in it. People have been saying in that video, on the comments, why don't they just forget it and just move on, change the lore? Why can't they just do that? Well, of course they could. It's their universe. They could explain it either which way. Or they could just do an all-out reboot of the franchise, which I think would make more sense, and I think it could work much better. But I don't think they're going to do that. They put way too much time into this. They have connections between Watch Dogs and Assassin's Creed. They have mentions between the two. So at the very least, I don't think that they're going to redo the lore. I think they're going to try to make it fit within it. And they've clearly put thought into it moving forward. And back 10 years ago when they were making games, in Assassin's Creed 2, there were mentions of the Führer bunker. And that's how we find out that Hitler in the Assassin's Creed universe was killed by an assassin while leaving the Führer bunker. So they've thought about this stuff moving forward, but there still are massive contradictions. And so it'll be interesting to see what they do. I still would put my money on Assassin's Creed codename Empire being set in ancient Egypt. That's just my guess. I think they're going to try to go back before they move forward. I could be wrong, though. You never know. Problem just being that as you get further and further and further into the future, things get more and more controversial, which World War II, having every single person working together, having the Americans, FDR, one of the modern Democratic Party's heroes of their party, having him be a direct confidant of Adolf Hitler, that would probably get some bad PR. I think they should still do it. FDR was actually fairly racist if you read his writings. He was not a great guy, but still, it would be a PR nightmare to deal with. So my guess would be they'll go way back in time. They'll go back to Egypt. They'll go to Greece. They'll go to Rome. They'll do that. They haven't gone back before. I think the first game was set in 600s AD. So if they go back before that and explain the pre-Assassin's Creed, that could be really interesting. That would be my guess. But summation, it could work. It could work. The lore allows it. Gameplay allows it. As we saw in Assassin's Creed Syndicate, where they actually did it, it could work. As to whether or not they'll do it, we'll just have to wait and see. Hey, did you like that? Well, that was just an extra of the full show that I do every weekend. So if you haven't seen it already, make sure to check it out. Ad card things popping up everywhere. And subscribe if you haven't already.